Arcade Heroes.
Get ready!
Greetings, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and the purpose of today's video is a follow-up to the Are All Arcades Doomed video, where I was discussing the recent media attention that was given to an arcade that couldn't even last 6 months in business. And it was just a little frustrating to me because, as I said in the video, that I run and operate an arcade. And so to kind of help contrast that and drive the point home a little more is that right now, when I'm recording this, it's June 8th, 2025. And it was on this day 17 years ago that I opened up this arcade here. Now, it was originally called the Game Grid Arcade. Back in 2020, I had to change the name, but as I'm going to show you here, my arcade has been in operation for 17 years, not 6 months. Now, have I made mistakes in that time? Yeah, I have. There's a few things that I would do differently, which is kind of what I want to talk about right now, as this could apply to the Operating an Arcade series. Now, the thing that is important to get across first off is that there's just not really a cookie cutter way to do an arcade. I mean, yes, there are chains, there are franchises like Dave & Buster's and Chuck E. Cheese's and Round One USA and several others out there, and you know, they have a pattern, but that doesn't mean you have to follow their pattern or that the way that they do it will work in every situation and every location. And that's more what I mean by how you can, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it. Now, one of the things that set my business apart from other arcades is that aside from being in a mall, which is a bit of a safe bet, it does reduce risk because the rent rates, at least here in Utah where I'm at, are a lot lower for being inside of a mall versus going to a strip mall or building your own building, which would be astronomically expensive in comparison. But also just the, I guess, perception of businesses within malls are different than those that are out and about in a strip mall sort of situation or on their own. But it's, you know, it's still a challenge. It doesn't guarantee success either. When it comes to the statistics of how long do businesses last, a year applies to pretty much everything across the board. And so I'm not meaning to humble brag about being open for 17 years, but again, I do want to point out that, you know, arcades can work. You need the right type of business model. You need to make the right adaptations depending on how things go. I mean, actually, how I am operating now is different than when I first started. As when I first started, I had a little LAN network of PCs where people can play like Call of Duty 4 and Halo 2 and other things like that. It's just over time, because the local library started offering essentially the same thing, people just started going over there for free, and also things like Xbox Live Arcade and such became so prevalent that we weren't seeing a lot of business out of that. Now, I have started contemplating if I should open that up again and do it kind of retro style with games like Quake or Quake 3 and stuff like that that are just competitive boomer shooters, perhaps, that were big on the LAN gaming scene, but I haven't fully decided if I'm going to do that yet as far as how I'm adapting right now to business. Now, another adaptation that I made is that when I first started off, I only had 2 pinball machines. I since have grown that to, let's see, how many is that? 9, I believe, at the moment. Now, as I've complained about in the past, unfortunately, pinball, as I've learned, there seems to be a certain limit where it's like, unless you have a lot more than what I have or a lot less, then it just doesn't seem to make as big a difference. And so I might downsize it a little bit. I haven't fully decided on that yet. I'd kind of like to keep it about the same and just maybe find the right types of machines that actually bring people in. But again, just pinball, as I've talked about several times, just isn't a strong earner. And that's because, in my view, most of the people that know what pinball is and really enjoy it and would actually put a lot of money into it already have by buying one and keeping it at their house. And if you have one at your house, why would you want to go out into an arcade and play that unless it's a particular machine that you don't have? And so in that regard, I get it. And it's unfortunate that for a lot of people that come through a mall arcade like mine where there's no entry fee, anything like that, and I also don't have food or drink. I know a lot of people will say, well, you should have food and drink. It's just in a mall situation, for me to restructure this place, remodel it, to be able to start serving food and drink, it would also be a really huge cost. And I don't know that it would work out in this location. It would probably work better in a different location instead. But anyways, with pinball, it doesn't earn very well, and so that's where I'm starting to consider other things that might earn better. Now, one thing that I've never done as part of my business model that is somewhat crazy, I admit, and I know most in the industry would call me crazy when they find out that I don't do ticket redemption at all. I've never had a mechanical ticket redemption machine. I have had some what I call videmption machines, video redemption machines, but anytime that I buy one, I turn off that feature and then I run it just as a normal arcade game. And sometimes in instances like Galaga Assault and Space Warp 66, they've actually worked out just fine. And so they're good enough games that they stand out on their own. Now, I do think they would be better if they were 2 players as opposed to 1. That's always a limiting factor. And so when it comes to regrets, with things that I would have done differently at, say, the beginning and continue to do, is focus a little bit more on multiplayer games. As the more players that you can have, the more money you can earn. That's always a bonus. Now, of course, sometimes there's just limitations as to how many multiplayer games you can have. It's limited by what's available right now, and it's not like every company out there has a Pac-Man Battle Royale either. But still, multiplayer always seems to perform better than single-player games within the arcade business. And I guess there is some of that too. Always chatter on your different game console, home console stuff is single-player games versus online play, whatever. That might be discussing. But another thing that I would have done more of when I first started was invest in some sports games. Now, I already had an air hockey table, but I should have had some basketball machines from the get-go, as that would have helped me out quite a bit more than where it's at right now. Now, in the background here, you can see so I have a couple of NBA hoops. I may end up replacing those at some point in the future. I mean, they're still fine. But there's a few different arcade basketball machines that are out there that I've been kind of looking at, such as the Pop-A-Shot Elite. However, I also have this Hoop Troop, which is for kids, and that's actually done really well. As it does just as much money as the adult ones, surprisingly enough. But I would have invested in something like that. I would have invested in a rhythm game earlier on. Now, as I recall, there just wasn't any DDRs available back when I first started, and I hadn't paid much attention to Pump It Up at the time. It was a little later that I learned about Pump It Up, and so I might have invested into something like that earlier on, so that way I could capture that audience. Now, of course, at the time in 2008, there wasn't Round 1 USA, and so it would have been a lot easier to compete in that regard. These days, with the Round 1 USA about 10 minutes away from me, I don't know that I would invest a whole lot in it. I mean, I would still want to have at least one dance machine for my style of arcade, but I just don't know that I would spend a whole lot of money on it, because I can't compete with Round 1 USA, and everybody in the area that is into rhythm games knows where to go for that sort of thing, and they go to Round 1, and so it's just like, I can't, they're gonna have pretty much everything that's out there. But there are some arcades that kind of use a business model similar to mine, where they focus more on one specific genre, such as rhythm games, and so that can work out, but it does depend on the area where you're at. Now, I have had people saying, well, you should do a free play arcade sort of thing, and it's just in a mall. I just don't think that would make much sense because arcades generally thrive when there's a lot of foot traffic. And as I've explained this before, can't remember which of the videos where I got into this, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on it. But just with free play, it really hinders the ability to have newer games, which is something that has paid my bills. And so as you saw from the video there, that I have a mixture of old and new together. And having the new stuff does help because it's really what pays the bills. And I've shared numbers in the past. I should do that again to kind of give you guys an idea of what is new versus retro in terms of earnings. And it's very, very few retro games actually make money. And of course, that's where it makes sense in a free play setting where it's like, if they're not going to make a whole lot of money anyways, might as well put them behind a simple flat fee and then it doesn't matter. But again, you're not going to be investing into something like The Walking Dead or House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn or Maximum Tune 5 in a free play arcade unless you want to probably fail. And so as I mentioned in the other video, free play arcades need a lot of games and perhaps a few other attraction sort of things, including like alley bowlers and sports games and food and drink and stuff like that to really move forward. But in my situation, again, what I've been doing has worked. Now, I pointed this out to members. If there's any members watching, thank you very much for your support. So what I do for the members is every month I'll share earnings of some specific games, and so it depends on what tier you're in as to which earnings I share. But for all members, I did write a kind of a miniature blog post as to how business has been. So since really the latter half of 2022, it's not been great. It's been on this steady decline, but the other oddity is just how business has bounced all over the place. So like normally it follows a pattern for me. Now some other arcades out there, other operators I've talked to, it doesn't always do this. Like they'll have a pattern, but it's a different kind of pattern. Mine is peaks in summertime and wintertime around Christmas, and then the lowest parts are when school is starting or school is getting out. But since really the middle part of 2022, it's just not followed any sensible, logical pattern whatsoever. And that's continued into 2025 so far now that we're about halfway done with the year, which feels weird to say. But it's been really frustrating because normally I could kind of plan out when to expect to have my slower times and brace for that and make sure things were taken care of. But now I just have no idea. It can be 1 month that normally would be low is suddenly high and then vice versa. And that's really frustrating. Now, I know that part of that does come down to some of my strategies, and that's where, as I was talking about a little earlier, I was looking to do some adapting, whether that's changing up my pinball selection, changing up some other things in my selection. As I announced in a video that I did just for my arcade channel today, that we're getting in Soda Slam by Alan 1 here soon. I'm going to be putting that on test for a little while, see how that does. And that'll be really one of the first big new games that we've had in quite a while. And that's been part of the problem with how business has been since 2022 is just all the debt that I had to accrue in 2020 to also open up a second location, which didn't work out. It's been a lot of debt that I've had to deal with, and debt can kill any business, and that's where you have to be careful with it. Sometimes I cringe a little when I hear some of the financing guys where it's just like, keep financing, keep buying new stuff. And it's just like, there is a limit to that, because if I'm spending $2,000 a month on payments, and I don't want to keep throwing that on, especially if business isn't doing so well and that it makes it so I can't cover those payments. Now, fortunately, I have been able to cover the payments and everything that I need to, but it's still made life tough, and it's not made it a big money earner, as I've said before. Why do I do this, I suppose I could say, is really it's because I love video games. I've always loved video games. I've always had some fascination with them that went beyond just having fun. And I always wanted to be involved with the video game industry in some degree. And so the arcade was my gateway to do that. Now, of course, do have mouths to feed. I do need to make money, and so that is still important. And any business to stay open, it has to make money. It has to be profitable. And if it isn't, then unless you've got income from somewhere else, then you just can't keep it going. Now, what I've had to do as an arcade operator, and this is something that if there's anybody out there watching this that's considering opening up an arcade, is that you might have to do is still have a day job or two day jobs to keep things paid at home while you're struggling to hit the black here. Now, if you hit the black really fast and you're doing great, awesome. I'm really happy for you. But there can be these times that come along that are just unexpected economic-wise, or maybe you've made some mistakes in your game selection or your business model or something like that, and maybe you don't have the money to adapt, where it makes it so that you're gonna have real problems in progressing forward and keeping the doors open, and so and that's why I also, as I've said before, plan it out as best you can. Talk to other arcade operators if they're willing to talk to you. Feel free to use all these videos. I mean, the information that I put out in these videos is probably quite valuable. Like if I was to put all this stuff into a book, so that instead of being kind of stream of consciousness like I'm doing right here, since I'm not scripted, would be, could sell that book for certainly more than $5 or more than $20 or $40 or $50. And so, or do business consultancy, which I've seen some rates from some consultants out there where they charge quite a lot of money to tell you how to run an arcade business. But again, it just comes down to there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, but whichever business model you decide to go with, you need to make sure that you're still doing it right. And I think I've said this with free play models, which have been very popular since Galloping Ghost really popularized that sort of concept, is it's like just building it and they will come is not a business strategy. It's not an effective one. And with free play arcades, every time I've talked to somebody who operates a free play arcade and they're willing to share their numbers, I'm really shocked because they make less money than I do. And so like the assumption out there is, oh yeah, well if you were in a free play arcade, you'd make a lot more money. And at least from every number that I've seen, including a free play arcade here in Utah, that wouldn't be true. I'd be making probably a good 30% less than what I do right now, and what I do right at this exact moment has been a struggle to keep everything going and keep the doors open. And so, yeah, do your research. I know that's sometimes just thrown out there maybe too nonchalantly, but like when I say that, I mean like actually take the time. If it takes weeks or months to do your research by doing interviews and collecting data, everything that you have to do to determine what type of business model will work for your arcade within your specific area or where you can open up a business, then that will help you be better positioned to succeed, as well as getting as much capital as you can. Having as little debt as possible and having as much capital as you can also help you get through the tough times. As I wouldn't recommend getting yourself into severe debt to keep the doors open. Now, obviously, you may have to get into some debt already if you're not a millionaire already, like I wasn't. My family was not wealthy. We were like lower end middle class a lot of the time, and it felt like everybody on my street had more cool toys than I did growing up. But I can't complain too much. I've been in a Brazilian favela before, so I know what it's like to experience poverty. And so I know I'm not saying that I'm super poor or anything, and obviously where I have an arcade, I've made things work. But I had to start really small, which of course, as I said, with free play arcades, it's not something I'd recommend. And of course, in general, small arcades just don't have the earnings potential as a larger arcade does, because every single machine that you can fit into your space, that's a potential moneymaker, and that helps your bottom line. Now, of course, each one of these eats up power, and so you need to have enough electricity to cover everything. But still, it's the more games you can have in any arcade business model that I can think of, the better. But still, that takes a lot more money to get there. And so yeah, if you can start off with more, family helping you out and getting a bigger SBA loan, or you get investors or something like that, then that can help you, especially if times get tough, because they will be tough, especially in your first year when you're trying to get people to know who you are and where you're at and what sort of games you have, and then hoping that the games that you have are attractive to people. One of the weird things that I learned in running 2 locations in the same state, they were only about 40 minutes apart, was that in my other location, I would hear a lot more requests for games that I never hear about in this location here. And so stuff like Area 51 was asked for quite a lot, and I was trying to find an Area 51 for a while and I just couldn't, oddly enough. And there were a few other games where it was just like, hey, why don't you guys have this? And now, that's one thing that I also learned is don't rely on just listening to 1 or 2 people who say, hey, why don't you have this game? Especially if it's an obscure game, then most likely that's not going to do really well. But if it's, say, a popular game, say like Time Crisis, and you're hearing a lot of people consistently over the course of a while saying, hey, why don't you have this game? Then that could be a good indicator as to what people are willing to pay for in your location. But yeah, I know this is somewhat of a rehash of stuff that I've talked about before. And hopefully, if there's anybody out there that's looking to do an arcade, some of this advice is, or hopefully all of this advice is helpful. But if not, then if some of it is, then I'll be happy. But just as another final point, arcades are not dead. We're not Blockbuster Video. And there's lots of things I can think of growing up that really don't exist anymore, but arcades are not one of them. And I know I'm not the last arcade out there. There's thousands of locations out there across the United States and all over the world that offer arcade games. Now, yeah, some of them are not technically arcades, like they're restaurants with big game rooms attached to them. Like I think Cece's Pizza is one in Florida that's kind of like that. But there's or movie theater lobby arcades and things like that, which may not be thought of as arcades, but they're still arcade games there. But again, there are some standalone arcades out there, and some do the free play model, some are the arcade bar, some are like myself, which I like to call a traditional arcade model. We exist. We're still making money, still making things work. There's still brand new games that are coming out. As I pointed out before, if there was no arcade industry, then that would mean there's no buyers. That would mean there would be no new games. And so it would make no sense to release one brand new arcade game if there was nobody to release it, much less 20 to 30 to 40 games a year that the industry normally sees. Now, I know that's a really pitiful number when you compare it to how many releases happen, say, every week on Steam. But because of the game cabinets and because of the pricing and because of the totally different economics behind an arcade, 30 to 40 is what is sustainable, and that still can sustain thousands of locations out there. Because not everybody buys new games, especially free play arcades or retro arcades. They tend to just focus on older stuff. But anyways, just hopefully that point gets across. And so it's like if I can make it work for 17 years, and I don't think of myself as like any sort of business genius. I don't have a degree in business or an MBA or anything like that. But I've still managed to make it work. Then it can work, but there has to be certain factors in place that you have to make sure you get right when you start off, so you don't end up like that unfortunate gentleman there in the UK where he was closing after 6 months. Now, one day will I close up? Probably. My kids don't seem very interested in picking up Dad's business and making this a generational business, which it's too bad, but it's like, hey, I want them to be able to pursue the things that they enjoy and whatnot. And it wasn't their dream to open up an arcade, I guess. And so, one day I might get tired of it, or if things continue like they have, then right now, one of the things that I wrote about in that blog post for the members is that I either keep doing what I'm doing right now and I just kind of have to hope that things will get better, or I need to make some adjustments, some changes. That's one reason why I'm looking at getting an air hockey table back again. I need to sell some stuff off here, and but also been thinking about doing the PC LAN, or it's moving out of the mall. Because one reason why I've realized that one reason why I'm not doing as well as I used to is not just because of, say, general economics. It's because of the FEC down the hall. Those of you who have been watching me for a while know that there's been this multi-million-dollar facility opened up at the very end of 2019. Now, of course, the mall, who was very happy to have them come in and bring all this money into them, was telling me, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. It's going to make you busier than ever because it'll bring more people into the mall. I never agreed with that logic, and to me, after 5 years, it's borne out that no, that's not correct. Just because more people are in the area doesn't mean that people magically come to me instead. And it's hard to compete with somebody like that because they're a lot bigger and they have more expensive games, like they have the Godzilla Kaiju Wars VR and the Fast and Furious Arcade Deluxe machines. And they'll grab everything that is a top earner, and whereas I can maybe make one purchase a year if I'm lucky on a brand new game, or I haven't been able to make a brand new purchase for the past couple of years. But either way, I realized that when I read a story that the Memorial Day weekend 2025 was the busiest Memorial Day weekend on record for movie theaters. And there is an IMAX movie theater down the hall as well, but before 2020, I would always be doing extremely well whenever a movie came out. But since 2020, yes, it was the pandemic, but it was also that FEC being in operation. And for a while, I just thought it was behaviors had changed with consumers. But as I'm seeing all these movies coming out that are making $1 billion, say like Super Mario Brothers and Barbie, and seeing some others that are doing well, but not seeing that reflected in my numbers, that's where I realized it's that other arcade that's taking the business and soaking it up, whereas I am not. And so even though I've done things to try and compete, it hasn't been enough, whether that's different games or unique games, rare games, pinball machines, all that stuff. It's not helping. And so that's where I'm thinking about changing up my strategy, or possibly leaving the mall and finding somewhere else to go to. It's just that's a huge risk if I do it. So I'll probably wait on that one. But and I don't know if I should be blasting out my strategy here just in case that competitor sees me and wants to stamp me out of existence, which is what I think they've been focused on to some degree. But anyways, or perhaps some of you out there have a good idea and let me know. There was one video a while back that I did where everybody was saying you should open up an arcade bar, but just so you're aware, I'm in Utah, which is now I guess one thing to note about Utah is in the past we had some fairly restrictive alcohol laws. They have been loosened up quite a bit. Like now Utah is actually pretty close to, I think, about 20 other states as to where their drinking laws are, but it's not just that, it's the culture here in Utah. And so it's just, there's not a guarantee that having another arcade bar, because there actually are a few arcade bars here in Utah already. But when I've talked with them, they haven't sounded extremely optimistic about business either. The way they were telling me, or when they would tell me some numbers, it was like, oh darn, I'm sorry to hear that things haven't been working out so great. And so it's not a guaranteed lock that combining alcohol with games equals instant riches. And so, but again, like I said, the market here in Utah is fairly limited for what will work in that regard. And somebody even tried to do a soda bar here where they just serve like sodas, and that didn't work out. Now there is one that has worked out that is a free play arcade that's not too far away from where my second arcade was at. But I've seen their numbers before too, and they're, like I said, they're below where I'm at. But anyways, I'm still happy to hear your suggestions and thoughts on stuff like that. It's just, if I come back at you or saying things like, well, there's the reason why that might not work in my situation, don't be surprised, but I'm still happy to listen to some other points of view, and maybe there's some ideas out there that I hadn't thought about. But anyways, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.